They did a blast through of chocolates looking at lead and cadmium. And they did the maximum tolerable dose for before there's like reproductive issues. So they have this cutoff. And they found all these dark chocolates were like really high. Like some of them were 5-6 times the level. And I thought, oh, that kind of sucks.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barbin. With me is Brad Pilon, and Brad's got a topic today, something to do with chocolate. So
Something to do with chocolate.
Throw it over to Brad and get us started. I don't even know what this is about.
Yeah, I love it. It's the best way to do it. All right, so
Yep.
I was talking about my drinking habit, right? And my drinking habit being every morning 2 espresso, and then midday tea, Taifu black tea, and then almost every night Head and I have a hot chocolate, right? We have a Lind hot chocolate mix, which is phenomenal, but we do it in about like an espresso cup. You know, my little espresso mugs I have.
Mhm.
So it's maybe a quarter serving of hot chocolate, but with like a sixth of the amount of water. So it's espresso thick, like it almost has a crema on top. So I was talking about that, and someone asked me, like, are you concerned about the heavy metals? And I thought, if there's one thing that sells more nutrition, that sells even more than magic, it's fear mongering, right? So I was like, no, I'm not concerned about the heavy metals. But it kind of stuck with me, right? So I'm like, okay, well, I know like there's heavy metals in your spinach, there's heavy metals in your carrots. We know about the concerns of your water. If you eat fish, there can be mercury. But I'm gonna look into it. So I look into it, and it's from a consumer's report. You know, that CR, that company.
Yeah.
And so they did a blast through of chocolates looking at lead and cadmium. And they did the maximum tolerable dose for before there's like reproductive issues. So they have this cutoff. And they found all these dark chocolates were like really high. Like some of them were 5-6 times the level. And I thought, that kind of sucks, right? Because that's not an insignificant, hey, we found a little bit of cadmium or a little bit of lead in the chocolate. This is like, hey, this chocolate had a lot of it. And then one thing led to another, and I started reading about the research, and I thought, oh, this is based on an ounce of chocolate. And you know me, I don't do an ounce of chocolate, right?
Mhm.
Like I do a chocolate bar, like one of the family size, and that's my bar. So the interesting thing here is, so for the viewers who don't know, I'm vegan, plant-based. I've been that way for about 10 years. And that decision was made purely for the animals, right? You guys don't get that reference. For the animals. And it's so not a health thing, but sort of a trying to help the animals thing. But now I have a conundrum because I like my chocolate, right? And I don't like the idea of very high amounts of cadmium and lead. Now, the cadmium and lead are lower in milk chocolate, like your typical dairy milk, right? So we have these dark chocolate options that are supposed to be phenomenal for you because of the polyphenols, the specific compounds in chocolates that are good for you. But then I'm going to use the word laced, but that's not the right word, tainted with cadmium and lead. Now, not all of them. There are some that are lower. And there is a massive movement and petition to get the chocolate industry to kind of right this ship and be like, guys, you got to test for this, right? You've got to do something here. But in the meantime, you can go to websites, sow.org, and they'll list all different chocolates and the amount of lead and cadmium that they have found since a follow-up research done now that that PR company, CR, Consumer Reports, did their initial study. And so you have like just very, very large amounts in some, and then like, hey, okay amounts in other, and then of course you've got Giraldi chocolates are really low in lead, but in this case high in cadmium. So you got to kind of pick your poison. But the question is, we're doing things, maybe not for the animals, but we're making decisions that we think are good decisions based on our health. So I figure most people watching this would think dark chocolate, because of the higher polyphenol content, lower sugar content, is better for you than milk chocolate. Cadmium especially, it stays in your body for a decent amount of time, right? So what do you do as a consumer who's trying to consume foods based on health and the healthiness of that food, only to find out that what you thought was the healthy choice once again might not be the healthy choice.
And this is a good one. So this comes
Let's
down.
unpack this because I know you're gonna love
Right.
it.
There's lots
Yeah.
to unpack here. First of
Yeah.
all, from what I'm hearing, and maybe you can validate this, it does not seem as though the higher quality chocolates, the premium brands, whatever, the Lind, the Gerald, I can't even say it,
I know,
Geraldi. It seems as though what you're saying is it's not a standard statement across the board that those ones are just better as far as the heavy
No.
metals versus just a Hershey's bar or just whatever you find at the grocery store checkout. So that's not the
Yes.
case, right?
No. So what you're actually looking at, it seems to be the way it works is you're a cocoa grower, and these companies bid on batches of cacao, however you word it. And sometimes it comes from an area where that soil is higher in lead and cadmium. And cacao is one of those things. It's actually a great plant because it does leach that stuff from the land, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, then we want to consume that. That makes it a bad thing. So it's not like, oh yeah, you just got to have really premium chocolate and you're good. In fact, it's all over the board. So you can have your dairy milk, it's low. Then you can have right beside dairy milk your, completely natural, organic John's chocolates made out of the back of his house. But that one's high. But then you're really, even when it comes to Lind and Ghirardelli, it's like, the 70% one is really high, but the 85 was good. And I bet you it just has to do with batching and which cocoa it got.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that probably could be different from batch to batch within the same brand. So
That's
Lind
the problem.
right.
Yeah.
So you don't know. They probably go to their preferred growers that they've narrowed it down to. I'm sure they're not bouncing around from one to another. They probably over time have found the growers they like best, but they're likely, there's no testing for this. Like this is like not how we have to do for supplements.
That's the issue. Yeah. So and to give you an idea, you're looking at 50 micrograms of cadmium per serving in some of these. That's not a small amount. In lead, you're looking at 7.5 micrograms in a serving. And a serving in this thing is an ounce, which isn't, what's that, like a warm up? It's not a real serving of chocolate. So, and then the advice is, but you're not supposed to have chocolate every day. And I'm thinking, don't you judge me, right? I will have chocolate every day and a decent amount of it. So, you're looking at, you want about 0.5 micrograms a day for lead and about 4 micrograms per day of cadmium, not 7.5 in a serving of now health foods certified organic cocoa powder. So that's the thing too, your baking powders aren't immune to this either. So your cocoa powders, and then the ones that sound super healthy, your Theo chocolates, your Trader Joe's are boom, right up there. So it's a conundrum.
Well, exactly. And so this gets to the point of when you go down this rabbit hole, there's no coming back. Like when you go down the health food rabbit hole and then you start talking, we're going to do a show about processed foods too.
Yeah.
But what is it that you're measuring that makes you decide beyond just I'm going to eat something and I want to eat it.
Yes.
We're not talking about just enjoying food for the sake of enjoying food. If you're online, probably you do a little bit of this if you're here listening. You're looking into why is one food better than another? What form of that food is better than another form of that same food? But you have to have some criteria. It can't just be carbs, proteins, and fats. Then it becomes, as far as its health benefit, then it becomes what kind of fats? Is it unsaturated fat? Is it polyunsaturated? Is it N3? Is it N6? What's the ratio of N3 to N6? Do they oxidize easily? What's the source
organic,
of the fat in the
organic.
first place? Yeah. Is it organic? Oh, is it GMO or not GMO? I mean, anyways, so you could go on and on and on, but you could also just be looking at one lane that you like. For example, the polyphenols in chocolate. You can easily make the argument almost all forms of chocolate have beneficial health and metabolic effects because of the polyphenol content. And you could just research that, completely ignoring the heavy metal content. You could just research the polyphenols, do a huge study, compare one chocolate to you have your whole list of the top 20 chocolates, like 1 to 20 as far as polyphenol content and all the benefits.
Pick the top one and go, right?
Right. But then you can redo that same list. What about the heavy metal contents of those exact same chocolates? Now, how does your list look? And which one's worth using? Which one's worth eating? Then, to Brad's point, are you eating 1 ounce? Like, I've never eaten 1 ounce of chocolate. If I'm going to eat chocolate, no, every bite is more than an ounce, let alone measuring this in ounce. amounts. So from there, now you're stuck. As Brad's saying, he's stuck right now. Do I even bother eating chocolate anymore? If so, how much? Do I switch off the chocolate I like to a different one because of the heavy metal contents, but then I throw away any potential benefit if I was even thinking of the polyphenol content? So
Right.
I think in your case, you probably don't care, right? It was just for the you just like having it.
Yeah, like I'm a dark chocolate. I don't like the no offense to my friends at Nestle or whoever makes it, like Carnation, those standard milk hot chocolates. Like I like my hot chocolate like espresso. Like I need that kind of like hit from it. So I loved it, but that means it has to be like a dark cocoa powder. And I've always loved my chocolate, right? Like if I could buy stock in Bourneville, I would. But yeah, now you're sitting here going based on just lead and cadmium. If you had to choose between one of the higher brands or a Snickers, like you're better off with the Snickers. But the problem I just realized is that's lead and cadmium, right? Who knows what the mercury content or some of the other heavy metals are?
Arsenic, any of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I brought that up because me and Brad have made a lot of supplements in our career, and these are the sort of things you have to test for. It can't go on the market if it doesn't pass a heavy metal content test.
Right?
Every single batch is tested for all of these heavy metals, and there is an acceptable limit that can be in there.
Yep.
That the scientific research to date so far has suggested in mass consumption in the population, we shouldn't really see any negative effect. But if any of your batches test higher than that, that can't go on the market. Like you won't get insured for it. So I'm surprised chocolate. I haven't even thought about this. Does every single food item get tested for that? And somehow chocolate
I think food is under
that one?
A different regulation than supplements, right? So I'll have to go through and look at it, but it's obviously they have to not be tested. Otherwise the Consumer Reports issue wouldn't be like sort of land breaking news. So somehow they don't test, or these amounts are significantly lower than whatever the food cutoffs are. But these companies are saying, wait, it's the maximum allowable dose levels for chemicals causing reproductive toxicity. I mean, that sounds like a max I'd want to be below, right? So yeah, so you want your chocolate and you're trying to make decent decisions. So decision one is just, well, no chocolate ever again, and that's not happening. Decision two is lower the amount of chocolate. I guess you could do that. You could constantly be checking these websites for the cadmium and lead, which was my initial assumption, right? I'm like, I'll just go through it and figure out which ones are lower. But the problem is, to your point, it's probably batch to batch, which means that if these, Brad's 70% chocolate made the passing grade in last year's batch, that doesn't mean I didn't buy different cocoa from a different grower this year and this batch is higher. Mm-hmm. So you can't really do that. So do you just switch back to milk chocolate and be like, okay, fine, I can get polyphenols in other places in my diet? So it is, but it is just an interesting thought experiment, because even when you come down to your coffees, right, and you think about pesticides and things like that, but you don't want to, nothing irks me more than the fear mongering that goes on in our industry, right? Just making people afraid of everything. And we don't want to do that because you don't want to be Chicken Little. And here's an example where I don't think we're being Chicken Little. I think it's something that we weren't really aware of. And you got to make decisions based off of it. I don't really know what the next step is here. So
right. And this is like, I don't really eat chocolate that much anymore, but this is kind of a staple for you in your sort of enjoyable daily routine. So so this leads to all kinds of other questions. What exactly is the metabolic consequence of too much lead and cadmium? And have you taken the time to measure whatever that is? It just blood levels of that, and then the consequential, what a higher level eventually does? Or can you test other? I don't know the markers. I don't know what that toxicity actually looks like. So now you have to think in terms of, if I'm going to continue eating this much chocolate, well, at least maybe I should go get tested for the things that it might mess up. And maybe in your body just doesn't mess them up. These are, again, this is population health recommendations. They're saying, in order to recommend across the entire population, generally we want you below this number for the likely side effects it may cause. But they don't know for sure in any one individual. So, okay, fine. So maybe Brad's decision is I like the chocolate. I'm going to take the step to find out, is it doing anything in my body? And if it's not, okay, then I happen to be on whatever end of the curve where it's not really bugging me too much. The other thing is, do you even know how much lead and cadmium you're getting from all the rest of your diet?
No, that's
Like
the
this is
thing,
just the
right?
one that you know.
Yep. And it's
Like
not you can measure blood lead amounts, concentrations. But I mean, I've never done that. Have you done that? Like, hey, I just figure I check my heavy metal levels, and I know, we probably have docs and physicians listening, be like, oh my god, more testing, right? But it, I've never done it. It'd be kind of nice to know the numbers.
But this is an example. Okay, this is a perfect example of this is important, or you enjoy it. You like this routine. It's like
Yes.
it's a bonding experience with Heather, whatever it is. It's just
Yeah.
this is part of your routine. If this is important enough to investigate, but also you're aware that, oh, this might actually not be great for my health. But again, we're working off population data and the assumption that you're at a level that's not good for you.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, if it's that important to keep in your routine, but you want peace of mind that it's not really having a deleterious effect on your health, maybe you do spend the hour or two researching what should I really get tested if I'm too high in lead, if I'm too high in cadmium.
Right.
Is it just the blood levels? And then, oh, that'll eventually lead to X, Y, and Z condition. Or do you go past the blood level and they're like, oh, you should immediately measure thyroid. You should immediately measure, I don't know, insulin. I'm just making this up. I haven't done
whatever
the research,
it correlates to. Yeah.
But it would make sense to do that research and go get those specific things tested. So the blood levels themselves, maybe you don't even absorb it out of the chocolate. Maybe it's your blood levels are fine. Then who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then test the things that could be going wrong. If they're not, just keep eating the chocolate. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
Just because there's a population level recommendation does not mean it's happening exactly in your body. Like for instance, I have super mega high iron. Like my blood iron's through the roof. I have to give blood to get rid of the iron. I
Wow.
would never ever take an iron supplement. That's just a
Right.
terrible, terrible idea for me. It's just going to lead to problems. But for people who are anemic, an iron supplement's really, really useful. But that's a case where like it's toxic to me, but not to somebody else. So the things you're eating, depending on how your physiology is set up, even with these heavy metals, it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad in your body, but you should find out if whatever the thing is you're eating, you want to keep it in your diet.
Yeah. And you raise a really excellent point is, well, we know there's lead and cadmium in the chocolate. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's being absorbed properly, right? We hear this all the time about nutrients that are in foods that don't make it into the body. So it's worth looking into more. I just thought it was a very interesting thought process of, okay, well then what else should we be looking for in our foods? And do we ever make food decisions based on this type of information? And then how much information do you need before you are making a good decision, right? Like, do I need blood test? Do I need a blood test every 6 months from like, oh yeah, that is chronically high because of chocolate? Like it's interesting because it's, one point you just take the populational health point of view and be like, yes, the highest cocoa consumers have the highest lead and cadmium levels in their bodies, which would be a great master study if anybody wants to do something. But otherwise, you have to go individual based and measure it yourself.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I was getting at. If you go down this road and you start learning about this stuff, how many things do you eat in a week that you're unaware of? So a situation like this where you might consume something, you're like, oh man, they don't test for that. Like that's not a thing. So now that immediately has me thinking of everything in my pantry. I'm like, I wonder how many, because we know the testing that's required for the supplements we make. Like So I know every supplement in that pantry has passed the heavy metals test and a couple of other toxins tests. Otherwise it can't get on the market. So I know everything and there's more. It's going to be within the acceptable, limits. But now that I've just found out about chocolate, I wonder how many food items, because we're not the food industry, in the supplement industry. So I wonder how many food items don't have that. Like I know wine is not subject to various tests that other alcoholic beverages are and other beverages in general, but somehow wine has lobbied its way out of all kinds of testing. And when you find out about it, there's some good documentaries. There's all kinds of things that end up in a bottle of wine from the less, let's say, reputable wineries that you'd be shocked that are in there. And yet you'll also be shocked. Wait, this isn't tested. So we're just going
for
on
our
faith.
For our vegan listeners. Next time you're shopping for wine, ask about the egg white levels in your in your wine, used as a clarifying agent for your red wines.
Mm.
Surprise! Yeah. So
I want to do an episode on wine. I know we're going to piss off all the wine drinkers, but just bring it on, because there's so many things that is underhanded about the wine industry. I'm sure there's good ones, but when they're not forced to do testing, then they're just not going to bother. So
you don't have to spend money on this, but you can if you want to. Isn't generally a business oriented decision to be like, I'm just going to spend that money. So, and then to your point, it really comes down to when you're making decisions on what to eat, where do you stop? Where does fear mongering begin, or being sort of a hypochondriac with your food? And where is it you're just actually being smart and recognizing things? So we've gone through this. Everybody remembers mercury in fish. Remember that whole thing? And then I think it's still a thing. And then it was broccoli or sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes had lead in them, I think, something like that. And cherries, the maraschino cherries had a bit of cyanide, something like that. We've always had this sort of thing. It's just where do you draw the line? And so it's a very interesting thought experiment, and it's something that needs to be looked into further, especially when, to your point, it comes to food seems to have different testing protocols than supplements or drugs.
Yeah,
brings that whole food be thy medicine thing, kind of flips that a little bit around when you're like, and you're poison. So
let food be thy not so bad poison. Whatever. We're not demonizing anything here. No. It's just, I guess we should wrap this one up. I guess the message here is, if you're, I don't know, if you come across an article like that, just be aware. Oh, do I eat a lot of that, or is it just nothing to worry about in your specific case? But if that's the case, maybe you need to check to see if it's doing anything to you, if you want to keep that thing in your dietary routine, or if I'll take it or leave it, and you don't want to go through the hassle of like testing what's going on in your body, then just leave it. If you're concerned enough. But it's something to be aware of, I guess, in the case of chocolate.
And we are able to test for lead and cadmium. So if you are concerned, kind of like I was, then consider getting it tested.
Yep. All right.
Beauty.
I think that's a good place to leave this one.
Man.
All right. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barber, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.